Today on JustDisc, we'll explore two common putting stances, straddle versus stagger. Both have proven to be effective on tour, but there are certainly some advantages and disadvantages to using each stance, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. We'll also provide some putting tips throughout and one nice little bonus tip at the very end, so be sure to stick around. So let's begin with the straddle putt. In this stance, your feet are positioned wide apart, like you're straddling a horse, with your shoulders, knees, and hips aligned facing the target. You then use your knees, hips, and wrists to propel the disc forward. Players like Kristin Tattar, Nate Sexton, and Kevin Jones exclusively use this technique, emphasizing its success. Now, when talking advantages of the straddle putt, the first and most common, most obvious is obstacle avoidance. The straddle stance allows easy maneuvering around obstacles like trees or bushes. Being able to step to the left or right to get around something makes it a very useful tool to have. The second advantage to the straddle is the increased balance. With both feet spread apart in an athletic stance, you gain a solid grounded foundation, aiding stability in windy conditions and on uneven slopes. Since you're not shifting your weight from your back foot to your front foot like the staggered stance, you really feel very grounded, ready to go, and it's very hard to miss as much to the left or right. Now, the third advantage to the straddle is that it helps with consistent releases. Since there's less body movement, less of a swaying motion from back to front, it makes it easier to replicate your putts. There's just a lot less moving parts. Finally, the last advantage to the straddle stance is that it helps with low ceiling putts. Whenever you have a tree branch or something in the way, you're able to get lower with this stance to make the putt. All right, now let's talk about the disadvantages to using the straddle stance. The first disadvantage is that you have limited power with this stance. Since there isn't much of a weight shift compared to the staggered stance, it's hard to generate enough power, especially if you like to push your putts more with your body than spin them. You therefore really need to add more spin onto the disc when straddling, which takes a lot of practice and time to develop. And that ties into our second disadvantage of using the straddle, and that it's initially the most difficult to learn. When learning both stances, newer players often shy away from the straddle because it just feels a little less natural and they struggle with balance and power, really getting the putt to the basket. So it's difficult for them just not to fall forward, to maintain their balance, which is a foot fault inside the 10-meter circle. All right, now let's move on to talking about the staggered stance. This method involves putting your front foot ahead of your back foot with both of them being slightly staggered apart. The putt is then performed using a weight shift from your back foot to your front foot with a timed release of your wrist. Pros like James Conrad, Paul McBeth, and Gannon Buhr almost exclusively use this stance. And notice we said almost, since most players on tour can perform the straddle stance when necessary, but prefer the stagger when available or when faced with longer distance putts. Now, there are three advantages to using the staggered putt, with the first being the most obvious, an increase in power. Since you're shifting your weight from your back foot to your front foot, it's just easier to propel the disc forward and make longer distance putts. This makes it so you don't have to put much spin onto the disc to get it to the basket, which a lot of players struggle with since they haven't developed a more spinny type putt. And considering the spin on your putts is one of the first things to go in the off season or if you don't practice, it's no wonder that myself as well as others tend to gravitate more towards the staggered if you're not playing as much. Now, the second advantage of the straddle is it feels the most comfortable, natural, and easiest to learn. Your weight shift is a lot more fluid, it's smoother, and it's easier to time. It's less restricted than the straddle stance. Whereas the straddle stance is a bit more abrupt, it's quicker, and you really need to add spin very quickly into the disc. So it's a lot harder to reach those farther distances. I mean, if you just look at Kristin Tattar or Kevin Jones, they exclusively use the straddle putt. And if you take a look at their motion, it's a lot quicker, it's more abrupt, it's less fluid than a staggered putt. Now, the third and final advantage to the staggered stance is its versatility. Because you get that back to front swaying rhythmic motion, it's a lot easier for jump putting and more particularly step putting. This stance allows for a bigger and easier weight shift, helping you reach farther distances to get to the target. Some people do prefer straddle putting for those jump or step putts, but we would say it's a little bit easier when using the stagger. All right, so now let's talk about the disadvantages of the staggered stance. The first disadvantage to this stance is a decrease in accuracy. Since more of your body is moving moving or swaying to perform the putt, mastering your release point will take more time to learn and perform consistently than the straddle stance. It's just naturally harder to be more accurate when more of your body is moving. Now, when doing this stance, some players will push this more with their body and legs, known as a push putter, whereas others will add more spin onto this with their wrists, known as a spin putter. Whichever you do more of, push or spin, there really is no correct amount. It really just depends on where your game is and what you're most comfortable with. Now, the other disadvantage to using the staggered stance is the difficulty in maintaining balance. When putting on uneven terrain like an upslope or a downslope, or during windy conditions, that weight shift becomes that much more difficult because you're not used to the new shift in weight from a lower slope to a higher slope, for instance. Yes, uneven terrain and windy conditions can also affect the straddle stance, but not as much as the stagger due to that substantial weight shift you need to perform. A little tip when you find yourself in these situations is to really practice, really exaggerate that weight shift during your practice putts. This gets your mind comfortable for how the weight shift should feel before you're ready to putt. Alright, so those are the advantages and disadvantages of the straddle and staggered putting stances. Both putting styles have their merits, and one isn't better than the other. The straddle stance keeps you stable, accurate, and allows you to avoid obstacles, whereas the staggered stance gives you more power, feels the most natural, but it relies more on good balance and accuracy. Truthfully, it really comes down to comfort and personal preference, but you really should learn and implement both based on the course conditions that you face. But of course, putting is a very mental game, which leads us to our bonus tip. When you find yourself about to make a putt with your preferred stance, but something just feels off or uncomfortable, that's the time to try and switch it up. Switching stances when you're uncomfortable gives you options, which can be great when your preferred stance really isn't working that day, when you're missing a lot of putts. So there you have it. Those are the differences between the two putting stances, but we're curious to know what works best for you. And if we miss an advantage or disadvantage, please let us know in the comments below. Of course, if you learned something and you like this video, you know exactly what to do. And thank you to all who are already a part of the JustDisc community. We couldn't do this without you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Merci beaucoup et à bientôt.